Lessons Not Yet Learned is a podcast that uncovers the costly mistakes that businesses keep making and how to finally move past them. Through storytelling, candid conversations, and expert perspectives, I'm on a mission to challenge outdated thinking, bring those overlooked lessons to the surface, and drive meaningful change, one story at a time. Hi, welcome back to Lessons Not Yet Learned. I'm your host, Kiran Kachela, and today we're talking about one of my favourite topics, the people side of change. When we're going through those transformations, we know that we're going to have to take people on that journey and that we're going to come up against some form of resistance. On today's episode, we're actually going to break down some of those common myths around change management and resistance. I'm going to kick off with one of the first myths that I'm going to break today, and that is that those people that you think are blockers to your change programs are actually the only ones warning you that your plan is going to fail. Now, in the world of transformation, we all love the word alignment. We love everybody being on the same page. And we're absolutely terrified of the words resistance and friction. So much so that I think so many leaders actually resist resistance. But I'm going to tell you a story now that might make you think differently about it next time. A few years ago, we were called in by a CFO of a big global corporation that was needing some help with landing change because they were about to embark on a big finance system integration program across all of their European divisions. Now, on paper, everything looked flawless. It was rubber stamped by one of the big four consultancies that told them that it was all a great solution. They had procured the most cutting edge technology and they had a really aggressive plan. So the board were happy. What could go wrong? The CFO knew that this was going to be a big change. So quite late in the day, but better late than never, he called us in to help land the change across Europe. Now, one of the first things that the CFO had planned was a big town hall meeting where he was going to announce this new system and all of the operational efficiencies that this new technology would bring. And so I joined him and watched from the sideline. And as he was giving this visionary speech and talking all about these great benefits of operational efficiency, I noticed a group of people at the back of the room. And they didn't cheer every time he talked about operational efficiencies. Instead, they had their arms crossed, they looked down on the floor, and they looked completely disengaged. They were your classic description of a blocker or somebody that's resistant. So after the town hall meeting, I went and spoke to the CFO and shared my observations. And the CFO said to me, "Kiran, don't worry about those lot at the back. They're just dinosaurs. They don't like change. So don't worry about it. We're just going to mandate this process and they'll all have to come on board." Now, I decided that wasn't going to be the path. So for the next 2 weeks, I got my team to go on the shop floor, spend time with those individuals, spend time with the wider teams. And they weren't there to preach about the vision and this new technology that was coming. Instead, they spoke to the team and asked them how they were feeling. How was their day going? What they found wasn't resistance. It was a warning. These finance business partners weren't trying to stop the future. They were actually trying to tell us that this new technology and new solution was going to fall flat on its face because it didn't account for the way in which transactions are actually physically managed and how they operate locally at each of the European divisions. If they did move forward with the CFO's mandate, all of the financial reporting would have completely collapsed, triggering some compliance issues and also misaligning all of their cash flow numbers, essentially flying the business into a blind spot. These so-called blockers, as they were called, weren't the problem. The problem was that their feedback wasn't listened to, and they were mislabeled as dinosaurs because people felt uncomfortable about their behaviour. After gaining all of these insights, I brought those findings back to the CFO. And the CFO immediately recognised those risks and accepted that we needed to pivot the build. So we spent the next couple of months redesigning things, working with those teams that had the critical feedback to make sure that we had the right solution. Those so-called dinosaurs actually became our biggest advocates because for the first time, they actually felt listened to. They felt like partners in this change. Just listening to their feedback and managing that resistance meant that we were able to avoid millions of pounds that would have been wasted on a solution that would have fallen flat on its face. It's not always that a solution is grounded in a genuine risk. Sometimes it's just a fear of change, a fear of the unknown. There's all sorts of reasons why you might have resistance, but the worst thing you can do is resist the resistance because it's just going to grow, it's going to spread, and it means that your solution won't be adopted, and therefore you will not realize the benefits. Now, here to talk to us more about change management is somebody that is a master practitioner, Ket Patel. Ket has been a practitioner for over 20 years and worked with large-scale corporates such as EY and Morgan Stanley, leading the people side of change. He now runs his own change management and coaching consultancy, and we've collaborated with him on a couple of occasions at some large change events. So I'm really keen to hear more about Ket's experience and to break down some of those common change management myths. So Ket, you are one of the most passionate people about change management that I literally know. I don't know anybody as passionate about change management as you. If I sit and have a coffee with you, we can chat for hours about people change. So where does that passion come from?
Oh God, what a great question. I appreciate you. There are a lot of great people out there talking about change, but I try to make it accessible. Why am I so passionate about it? Do you know what? I think it's just years of seeing how functional change has been through projects. It's like, here's a timeline, here's a series of milestones we need to hit. And at some point, we'd like people to kind of use the stuff that we put out there, whether it's a structure or a system. And then people get really bent out of shape when people kind of go, well, this isn't what we asked for, or I don't want to do this. And you're like, why are you resisting? And it's just like, there's more to it than that. So I've always been curious, despite having quite an analytical mind. Like, I did mathematics, I love science,
right?
So I'm logical, but I also I love the dynamic of human behavior, that it's unpredictable, and actually there's quite a lot of curiosity that sits behind that, which is like, why do certain people behave the way they do in certain
it's the
situations?
bit that people often call it soft and fluffy stuff.
Yeah, that's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, because it isn't soft and fluffy.
I can see
there's a science behind the behaviour.
So something I've been trying to bridge this soft and fluffy idea with this notion that the soft and fluffy bit is that we're a bag of chemicals that sometimes demonstrate emotion, and that's the fluffy bit. Like, how do you act around people and the way they behave and their emotions that come out. But one of the things I've been trying to do with organizations is talk about, what does that tell us about people? Like, we're always talking about insight. What data do we have, and what can we learn from the thing? So it's like, well, an emotion is an insight to someone's behavior. And so if you slow down enough to think about what might be going on for them, what is the emotion telling you, either about yourself or about someone else, it gives you an insight. So I'm trying to move away from it being soft and fluffy to being hard and being factual or like evidence-based, by going, well, what do we learn by just slowing down to notice why people react in the way they do? And I think that's what, it's easy to label it soft and fluffy for sure.
It is. I mean, my change lead in my company, she literally says I'm the soft and fluffy one. Because they know, she knows that's what she gets labelled. But you're right. So what you're saying is, it is a data insight, essentially. But I guess people struggle to recognise it as data because it's not a number.
Yeah, I think when you think of data, you do think of like some sort of metric or key performance indicator. I'm sort of being more general, and it's perhaps qualitative, not quantitative, but it is some information that tells you something, and it's whether you choose to slow down and notice what it tells you. And that's the thing no one teaches you how to sort of notice how you're feeling and reacting and why you might be. And part of the deeper psychological element of change, which is why I get so passionate about it, is there is a lot going on in here that is hidden to everyone else.
Yeah.
And so if it's hidden to everyone else, we can make assumptions about why people act and behave the way they do, which are completely counter to what's actually going on in someone's head. So it's just trying to find a really accessible way of talking about that. And I think, that for me is what's at the heart of it.
And it has a knock-on consequence.
This whole dynamic of resistance is bred in that area of like, I thought I understood what someone did. They didn't act in the way. They must be, annoyed, whatever. And so you label it something that you understand without really truly trying to understand it. And I think that's where it becomes quite unhelpful. I mean, resistance in itself is not the nicest label.
No, it's not, is it? You said that, we're not taught how to recognize how people are feeling, but also is there an element of it's actually uncomfortable and I'd rather just resist it?
I should probably say we're not taught. We're taught all the time, right? So how do you learn how to react in certain situations? You might have seen them before and you might try to sense what is going to happen and you react accordingly. So the difference is we're always learning sort of what happens with people, how they behave, how they respond, and we're sort of keeping that in our mental memories for the time we are presented with similar situations. The difference, I think, that we need to make is to be more conscious of that cycle, because sometimes we form beliefs about way people's respond that aren't helpful to us.
We're filled with assumptions, but how much of it is actually avoidance?
Most of it is avoidance, right? I think, again, are we taught or do we care to try to put ourselves in places of discomfort? If you and I have a falling out over something, and I made some assumptions about why that might be, am I going to put myself in some uncomfortable situation where I try to test them out? Probably not. I'm just going to go, I probably don't want to repeat that again because it was uncomfortable. Let me move away from it. So I think we're not good at dealing with it because we're sort of too busy dealing with the way it impacted us and how we avoid that feeling in the future, as opposed to going, oh, that didn't feel right. Did it feel right for you? Maybe there's something we could learn if we talked about it.
I agree. I mean, I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough practical advice or training on actually how to manage conflict and how to actually manage that, because it is an uncomfortable situation. Yeah. It's not meant to be easy. And I always say as well, we should expect resistance. Like, people are always really surprised when they're faced with resistance during change and transformation programs. But we should expect it. We should anticipate it.
We should anticipate it. We should certainly expect it. I would love it if, I use the word resistance when we talk about sort of this negativity that people might feel, right? But I think it's unhelpful, right? Because again, it's that label. But I think whatever we call it, we do need to slow down and kind of understand what's going on. And that requires you, the person listening to what feels like resistance, to kind of get over your own feeling.
Exactly.
And that's where we're sort of, I don't think we're great at, right? Because organizations try to move at pace, and then you've got a timeline and you've got an investment, and it can feel like if we slow down too much to notice these things, we're not going to achieve what we planned. But what we don't notice is that resentment kind of carries forward, and therefore we don't get the adoption and we don't get the benefits.
Exactly. There's no benefit if you're not going to get the adoption.
So you kind of almost go, I don't want to deal with that now. I hope it will go away.
Yeah.
But what it does is it just sort of sits underneath the surface, and that's
it gets worse. It gets worse, not better, because it's not being managed.
Yeah. And even that, I think, is the value, right? Like, in an environment now where change happens so quickly and to some extent so unpredictably, like out of an organization's control, we need to be creating more space to kind of understand why people aren't wanting to support something if we kind of see that. What is it about what we're planning to do that carries some risk or concern that people need to air, and what do we want to do about it? Because that's like really practical and healthy discussion to have. That is, I've got this feedback, I've got this observation, I think this is going to happen. And then it gives you choice. Like, what do I do about that? As a leader in an organization, when you understand why someone is sharing this frustration or, you know, opinion about something, you've got a choice to make.
Exactly.
And then you've got your eyes wide open, right? Like, I think if you just sort of shun it away into a box, not only do you create resentment, but you also lose the opportunity. Yeah, you're working blind. Yeah, you're all of a sudden, then something happens. You're like, oh my God, how did that come about? And you're like, well, someone did try to warn you. You just were too uncomfortable at dealing with what it felt like to hear it.
You said earlier, Ket, that it sometimes feels like, you know, stopping to think about how people are feeling might slow the program down.
Yeah.
Do you think that leaders do see change management as something that's actually slowing the program down?
I think it can definitely be seen as that, right? Like, and especially when you know, to your earlier point, that it can be seen as a soft, fluffy thing and not necessary thing.
Yeah.
I think people see anything that's not necessary as a potential to slow something down.
Yeah.
So I always try to reframe any of the change work we do as an insight to the risk we're carrying that we should make visible. And then we have choices about what we want to do with it as a leadership team. Now, that is much more practical. You can do something useful with it. And it doesn't mean what we have to do is ask everyone their opinion. It just means when people share something with us, we take the time, as much as we want to, and that is a choice, we take the time to understand what it might tell us, and then choose what we want to do with it. And if we spend just, you know, a small amount of time doing that, we might create a little bit more engagement and a little less risk, and our program might go more successfully. But if you don't want to do that at all, that's equally fine. But I'm just saying the downside is that you might miss some things. So it's
a really good way to look at it, thinking about it from a risk perspective.
100%.
I think it just reframes the whole topic, right? It reframes the whole topic. And I mean, I guess in my experience, I've seen two things. One is that people, often leaders of transformation programs, sponsors, they see change management as comms.
Yeah.
So as long as you've communicated, we've done change management. And then the other thing I've seen a lot of is literally no thought towards change management until the last second. And then it's all, right, we need to roll this out now, and we need people to understand what they need to do. Oh, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
What's your experience?
It's all out there, right? I think it is misunderstood. I think, and I'm going to maybe I might get shunned out of the community, but I do think we protest too much about its importance, like change management. Like I'm a professional. I love what I do. I think it's important, but I don't think everyone should think it's important. I just think everyone should see what value it could bring them. And if they choose not to, then don't. That's fine.
See, I don't know. I'm going to argue that point as someone that, you know, loves change management. I get what you're saying. I do get that. And I agree. I think perhaps we're out there cheerleading about change management as a term.
Yeah.
But actually, you're right. It is about the value of it. But the people side of change is like essential to any transformation.
Well, I think every organisation is doing it, right? Whether they've got a formal change management capacity, they're putting change in place and it's impacting their people. So they're doing change no matter what. The question is, are you doing it and having the outcomes you want? Yeah. So if you're happy with the outcomes you're getting, then who am I to say whether that's right or wrong for your organisation? If you're not, then maybe there is some things that change management as a profession could offer to you that might help you get those things that you are after. What I don't think is, I'm not going to dictate as an organisation you must, because you're doing change anyway. So it's about the outcomes. Yeah. And I think, like, if I'm being like idealistic, yes, I believe everyone should do good change management.
Yes.
Right? If I'm being realistic, I'm like, I get it. There's only a certain amount of things you want to focus on. This might not be it. You're quite comfortable where you are.
I just don't think it's an option, though.
Yeah.
See, and it's good. It's good to have a debate, right? There's no right or wrong. It's a debate and it's different perspectives. But I guess for me, you're right. Everyone's doing change, but are they managing the change? Because how many projects do we see fail? Like, how many projects go live and then we're back to square one a year later, 2 years later? We're literally talking about the same problem again. We're spending what should have taken a year has now taken 3 or 4 years, and that is because of the change management. And so I think it actually shouldn't be an option of...
So the thing I think I agree. So like where I said idealistically, everybody would do it well. What I want to make sure is I'm not forcing everyone that they must doing it. No, what I want organizations to realize is that if they're noticing things that aren't working well for them and they want to do something about it, then change management might be able to help you.
100%.
And what this is almost applying change management to getting people to recognize change management is I first need you to recognize that something isn't going the way you want it to go in order for you to consider changing your own behavior. And if I'm trying to preach to you, you must do this, well, I'm just as bad as everybody else telling you you're doing stuff wrong. And that's not what it's definitely not what we're about.
No, you're so right.
We recognize there is all manner of ways of doing it and it can come with all sorts of outcomes. It's whether it's the outcomes you're expecting.
Yeah.
And that's what again, like there's no single way to do change right. There's 100 different models. Yeah. And in fact, there's probably 100,000 more. In fact, one of the things we're focused on is that every organization already has a model of change in their mind, whether they're using a formal one or not.
Exactly.
The question is it delivering what you want it to?
Yeah.
So when we walk in and talk to an organization as change agitators, we're like, what's working, what's not? What can we give you that might help you based on your leaders, what they're about, how they work with their teams, because that gives you something that's very bespoke to what your organization needs. Not a sort of off-the-shelf model, but it also means it's about the outcomes you want to achieve. Yeah. So if I gave you a off-the-shelf model, I don't know that's going to meet the outcomes you need.
Exactly. I think people get too hung up on like specific frameworks.
Yeah.
And I'm such a believer in that blended approach, not the cookie cutter style approach of actually saying what's right for this organization.
Yeah.
What does experience tell us? What kind of leaders do we have? What objectives do you have in the organization? What values and vision do you have? And actually then tailoring something that makes sense.
Yeah. I think this is where like the idea of having good change management and then as a leader experiencing resistance is like noticing that there is a connection here, both between the way you think about how change does work in your own mind as a leader. I should tell people and people should get behind it and they should get on board. That's probably the story people are telling themselves. And then when people give, sort of feedback or resistance, it can feel like, well, look, I've told you, I've communicated, I've trained you. What more do you want? We're trying to, as part of the work we do, sort of get people to notice that we do have our own thoughts and feelings about change and how it should work and what we think it should do for us, and we should be able to vocalize them as good employees. But that doesn't mean those all get incorporated into the way the change is done. So it's about having adult conversations around the way change gets enacted and everyone being able to go, okay, you've heard me, now I've just got to get on and do my job, you've got to get on and do yours. And we're not going to kind of fall out over it, right? We're going to just be adults about the fact that, in order for an organization to grow, we need to consider changing.
Exactly.
And so
it's the epitome of change and change management really is that it's quite intrinsic.
Yeah, it's 100% down to every single individual.
Yeah, everyone has a very different way of seeing things, right? We're all different. We've got diversity of thought.
You talked about the fact that we don't really educate people as to how to handle conflict and tension and friction, and these things all come up when you're talking about change. Mainly because if you think about most of the people change impacts, it's the people who have already got a day job, 100% occupied, and they've got zero capacity to think about anything new.
All the time.
So the tension's already there just by the nature of another group of people going, by the way, we're going to change this. Do you mind just getting on board with it?
Exactly.
So what we've been doing to try and create that space is when we go into work with organizations, we're not just talking to leaders about how they think about engaging their staff with change. We're talking to staff about how they show up. We hold sessions with staff to say, you know what, each and every single one of you is responsible for how you respond to change, right? And yes, there are external factors to you, but there are also things that you can control that can help give you choice and can help you work with the people around you.
So
and
true.
Sometimes you're going to come into conflict, but that doesn't mean you should fall out over it. You should have healthy ways to kind of uncover what people are keeping in their head, thinking about what they think is going to happen, and just trust one another a little bit more to have honest conversations. And so we did that with our last client recently, where it was a 300 people organization. They're going through local government reorganisation, so a huge uncertainty in front of them that nobody really knows what it means for everybody. But what the organisation wanted to do was say, let's have an open dialogue about how we all experience change. So we set up a series of sessions where we went through this idea of like getting people to notice how they've been confronted change in the past, what they do well, what they can learn from others, how they've faced adversity and built their own resilience. And, you know, like we didn't actually name any of those things. We just talked about the stories of going through change in our lives. And so it was really powerful when people started to tell their own stories, how it gave insight to how other people reacted.
Absolutely.
And also created a little bit of empathy to go, do you know what, next time when someone reacts that way, I'm going to maybe hold my own judgment a little bit.
It's a bit of self-awareness, you know. It's the same as when I get an update on my iPhone and I'm like, oh, you know, I'm going to have to learn how to, you know, navigate my screen again. And it's the same process essentially, and it's understanding our own personal experience of change to then be able to be empathetic towards somebody else's experience of change. And I think that's actually one of the things that we often do wrong, because I see a lot of change programs structured in a way where it is a separate change team, and it's almost like it's their responsibility to make sure that everything changes and that everything's adopted. And yes, you know, absolutely, they're there to facilitate, they're there to support, they're there to put some structure and some framework and some methodology behind it, and that's great. But actually, you know, we do have control as individuals, right? And everyone's got to play a role in that. And one of the things I see a lot is, you know, a change will come from the centre, right? And it will get communicated, and then it's communicated down to the middle managers. And then the middle managers are told, right, off you go, roll it out to your teams. But no one's done any change management on them.
No.
So there they are, feeling frustrated perhaps, or not in the know. You know, they don't understand the change, they don't understand what it means for them and their team, and yet they're there having to roll it out to the wider team.
Yeah, 100% right. I mean, the area that, like, even in my early practice, I was always working closely with line managers whose team were impacted, and they're like, look, can you just help me understand what this is and how it's going to impact my team, because my team are asking me questions I don't know, I've not been informed, so can you come? And so I accidentally ended up sort of coaching people in that position. But as part of it, you kind of almost have to build capability in people and say, do you know, it is also partly your responsibility to ask the hard questions. Why this change? Why now? What are you expecting of us? When do we need to do it by? And
you're so right.
It's interesting because I've worked with so many line managers, and in fact, part of the work we do now is really aimed at that sort of senior manager role, who, if you think about the power that group has, not just as individuals in terms of the volume of people they manage, but also as a collective at that level, all of a sudden, I'd say 70% of the organisation is managed by a level of senior leadership, one or two below like executive leadership. So if you got that group working really effectively together, all of a sudden change would become quite a powerful tool in order to navigate the organisation, because you'd be asking these tough questions of people above you. Why this change? Why now? Why this volume? and actually you'd have a really powerful voice. But we massively underinvest in line managers.
I agree.
There isn't any training on change that is beyond here's the Kubler-Ross change curve and here's a couple of models about how we move through transitions. Like it's so not tangible for the real world experience of managers.
Exactly. We've just done a podcast episode where we talked exactly about that. The fact that leaders aren't taught how to be leaders.
Yeah.
They grow into the role, but they aren't necessarily taught some of those things. And coming back to that questioning, I mean, you're right. That again, that's a personal responsibility to be able to ask those questions. That's the level of control we have on change. But actually, sometimes if there's not the psychological safety or the culture to ask those questions, that also has a massive impact on how that change is actually going to land.
This is where it's like quite important for, I've been using this word of agency, right? Like this idea that you have choice and control over what happens to you. You're not I don't want to say victim, but like there is this feeling sometimes that everything is done to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's felt quite strongly in the middle layer of management, because it does feel like you're squeezed at both ends, right?
Agree.
You've got your employees expecting a lot of you, you've got responsibilities to your peers about getting operations done effectively, and then you've got senior managers coming in with lots of great new big ideas to take the company forward.
Absolutely.
And it all comes to your door. And the problem is, unless you've kind of got a really clear grasp of your own style of management and how to set effective boundaries and to push back and to work closely with your peers, which is not what you're taught, then you get kind of consumed by the pressure. And I've been working a lot in local government and the charity sector of recent years. And I think those sorts of purpose-led organizations feel it most in the middle, because there's this sort of like everything we do has an impact. So it all must be done. And if there aren't the people around me to do it, guess what? It's down to me to do it. So they take a lot of burden on. And I think that's where you've kind of almost got like that. Yes, everything that's important to do, we've got to do. But you've also got to set some boundaries for yourself. Otherwise, you will be consumed and overwhelmed, right? And
I agree. And that for me is part of that training or, part of that coaching of actually setting boundaries, I think.
And sort of going back to this idea of resistance, right? I mean, that will feel like, I have to say, like with organizations, when a senior leader sort of engages us, I'm really clear that whilst we will come in and build capability in staff and managers, what they'll notice is they will be asked to make clearer choices. So that will feel uncomfortable for senior leaders, because 100%. All of a sudden we're now saying, here's 10 things you've asked me to do. I've only got time for 7. Which ones would you like me to do? Now, let's be honest. Most diligent managers will try and do all 10 anyway, right? But the fact is, it's a conversation.
It is.
I've only got time for 7. I know you want me to do 10. We're going to have to introduce some risk somewhere here, right? Like, we'll try and get it done.
And I don't see enough of that.
There isn't the candidness at that level. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to encourage both senior leaders who invite us in to help hold these conversations, to recognize there is a little bit of their own, I don't want to call it fragility, but this idea, people will push back and it will feel uncomfortable for you.
Well, exactly. It's being comfortable with the uncomfortable that we need to get more comfortable with. Because it is, I find that when someone does push back about something like that, they're often labelled as difficult or blockers.
100%. And I think it's really and it's done so because, again, if I appreciate as senior leaders and executives in organisations, you've got shareholders, you've got goals, they are aggressive, no one is going to let you off the hook. So that pressure just trickles out to the organisation, right? Completely understand that. But there is a downside to letting the pressure trickle out too much, which is you don't move as fast forward as you'd like because there's too much uncertainty being created and conflict and tension being created.
It can actually create chaos.
And that's the thing you kind of have to get people to notice, right? Is that no one's saying we shouldn't do all the things that we need to do. It's just notice the tension it creates in the organization if it's without dialogue about what's important and when and which order and what risk we introduce. And the more we have those conversations at senior leader level, senior manager, executive leader, the more, and this is a really big thing for me at the moment, the more adaptable an organization will become. If you can have honest conversations about what we need to do when, and we can face into things we weren't expecting as a collective, well, you will be much more prepared for the uncertain nature of the world.
Yeah,
and that's
adaptability, resilience.
Yeah.
It's all linked. It's people.
It's people, and it's this, going back to this idea of resistance, it's like, if you have that resistance in your head as a sort of concept, you'll see that that feedback as negative.
Yeah.
And you'll close that ability to have that coordinated response. So you've got to let go of that idea of people's feedback is in some way negative.
Exactly. And see it as a positive.
You've got to see some utility to it.
100%.
And that doesn't mean you have to accept it. One of the other things, when we talk to employees, actually, one of the things that people really shy away from is giving one another feedback. At an employee level, it's really, really uncomfortable.
You see it with PDRs, don't you? Performance reviews.
No one wants to give other people feedback. Like, there is no good way to tell someone, I don't like what you did, right? Or at least it doesn't feel like there is. And I think this is something where you have to appreciate that if you're given feedback, it is a choice for you to do something with. You could give me a piece of feedback and I could react to it negatively because I feel like it's at me, but it's also a blind spot I might not know.
Exactly.
And so it's an opportunity, if I can reframe it, it's an opportunity of something that I didn't know, and I can choose whether I do something about it.
It's how we perceive things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So honing in on resistance a bit further, is there a particular story that comes to your mind that is really memorable?
I mean, I'm going to share something that was me, right?
Okay.
I was the resistor. I, many years ago, was on a path of promotion, and I was, got asked to do lots of projects to support it, and it was over 2 years. And it came to the time where it was going to, it was going to be put forward. And then at the end of it, it was like, oh yeah, there isn't really the role for you to be promoted. And so we're not going to promote you. And I tell you what, I threw my toys out the pram. I was just so frustrated. And I would tell anyone that would listen, that, there's no value. There's, all these stories that I was just like, look, they haven't, they don't, value what I do. How have they done this? Look at everything I've done. And I became the resistor. And what was really noticeable for me was like, I got bored of hearing myself. I got bored of being the person that was like negative, because it's not really me. And my wife sort of just said to me, you haven't been moaning on about this for ages. And it sort of really caught me to say, do you know what? I've actually got a choice here. I noticed that perhaps what I'm sharing is not being listened to. And it's actually not doing me any good. So I've got a choice. Do I stay here and accept that that's the cards? Or do I pick myself up and go and do something else?
Yeah.
Right? And I think where resistance sort of typically lands in organisation and becomes a bit of a trait of people is where they fail to recognise they're in an environment that doesn't support the way they think or the way they think they want things to work. And so they keep putting themselves in the situation, but the wider environment doesn't change. So for me, that's been a really powerful lesson, because I kind of try to work with people where they're sort of like, oh, it's always been like this is going to be a terrible change. And you're like, okay, tell me about when you first sort of felt like that. And it'll be like, well, the last time they tried to do this, I was giving them all this advice. I was, I told them they shouldn't do it this way. We've tried it 15 times before. And you're like, right, so you've basically not been listened to. I get it, right? If I can change that for you this time, can we see if we can maybe bring a different approach to this? And so as soon as you kind of, I mean, it's not overnight, right? But people need to feel like their voice is heard.
100%.
So those people who have been resistant in the past have not had their voice heard, or at least not felt like it. And they've chosen to stay where they are, right? And that's been probably broadly not great for them, but they've probably been okay about it.
For both parties.
For both parties, right? And so you have to tackle it head on And you have to see whether the person is willing to see that things can be different if things are done differently and they are listened to. So I try to make that point in these situations where you've got like staunch resistors, like, hey, let's be fair, they've probably not been listened to and they've had some really valuable insight. Let's see how we get them involved. But then if they carry on, you also have to say, do you know what, this isn't acceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You are part of this organisation and you can't just
Absolutely.
moan on forever.
Yeah.
So that level of honesty, it's easy for me to do it coming in as an independent, as an external, to say like, I get why you're moaning, but you don't get to moan all the time,
No.
right? Like either accept the environment or move on.
It's not
right?
helping anyone.
It's not helping anyone.
No.
And it's not making you, it's not making you feel good about
No,
work.
no.
So I had that experience. I came through it and realized, lots of other people find themselves stuck. They don't make that jump to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to stay, quite frankly. But then they keep putting themselves in a situation where they're like, why is no one listening to me?
Well, exactly. So one of the questions that I often get asked is, that scenario, that example of an individual that perhaps is moaning and they're not happy, and then you having that conversation with them to say, how would you feel if we were able to change that on this one instance? How do you scale that when you've got a massive organisation, you're doing large scale change, you can't get around to everyone, as you said earlier. How do leaders navigate that?
I do think it's part of our general talent development. So you're right. It's really difficult to get round to everyone. I think it's a bit like you can only tackle it when you see it. So I think you as a leader, you have to be aware that there are different approaches to dealing with those sorts of situations, and you do have to tackle them head on as opposed to just letting them carry on.
Exactly.
So
don't resist
you
the
don't
resistance.
know. Yeah, you don't know where it's going to pop up, right? But I do think there's the flip side of that. Is I think we've been working really closely with HR when we go into organisations to say, whilst we do these programs now, in a year's time, your organisation is going to look slightly different because you'll have new people come in and some people will have left. So what's your plan to carry on this conversation? One of the things that we offer is, whilst we come in and facilitate these discussions, they're actually enabled by an audio series. So the content is there. It's the clients, right? So they get to listen to it. But when people listen to it, we create the space to have a discussion around what it means.
Yeah.
And that's something you can continue to do. And it has to be part of
discussions, isn't it? It's having conversations.
Yeah, it's not one and done, right? Like your organisation changes in terms of the services it offers, the client base it has, as much as it changes the people that run it.
Yeah, and the external environment's always changing.
Yeah, so you have to kind of keep it alive as a conversation. And that's, I think, the downside of the way change management is done, is it aligns to this kind of project view of change.
I totally agree.
Which, you kind of have to move beyond that. And I hate to use the word culture, but certainly a mindset, right?
100%.
Of sort of being open to change and being able to deal with change. I
Exactly. And for me, it's part of that continuous improvement philosophy.
Well, yeah, exactly, right. Like if the kinds of work you guys are doing, like where you're sort of thinking about continuous improvement,
continuous.
that mindset has to be there, which is we never quite know how to do anything 100% well, so there's always some learning to do and there's always some improvement to do,
and there's always change that makes it, whatever you were doing yesterday, no longer relevant today.
Correct. Yeah. And this I think now more than ever, and it'd be interesting to get your take on it as well, like I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, organizations could rely on relatively medium-term plans about what they were going to do. They set the direction, they told people what they needed, and they said go. I think now that level of external unpredictability is increasing, which means you need to be having these conversations more frequently. You need to have a much better internal conversation at all levels and across all levels about what's driving our action. What have we learned that we didn't know last time and that we're going to respond to differently, and how do we all show up to do that? And
exactly that.
They're not the kind of conversations we're used to having.
No, and I think it comes back to what you said earlier, that it's information. Those discussions, that's a source of information. And you need to keep your finger on the pulse all the time and see what's the temperature, what's going on, what are people saying, so that we can actually understand, what does this look like and what do we need to do differently?
Yeah.
And it's actually why we've done this podcast, because we have got so many lessons to continually learn, and we don't do enough of that. We don't reflect enough and say, well, what are we learning from this, and what are we going to do differently next time?
I mean, I do love the fact you call it lessons learned, because
Lessons not yet learned.
No, well, yeah, sorry, not yeah. The reality is most organisations do lessons learned, but don't learn anything.
No,
right?
exactly. They're documented on a paper or on a digital file that then gets filed and never gets opened ever again.
And you know, the interesting thing is, right, like, there's no such thing as not learning. There's just not learning together. Right,
yes.
so everybody learns something.
Oh, exactly.
Right, like everybody.
We're learning all the time.
Yeah. So it's the question is, did we all learn the same thing, and can that help us in the future?
And did we change anything?
Yeah.
You know, did we change anything from that?
Yeah.
You know, it's the same as when we go and get customer feedback. You know, okay, we've got feedback, we've got information. Now what? What do we do with that data? What are we going to change?
Well, do you know, this is the other interesting thing about resistance? I had an organisation I worked with, and quite rightly, they did a massive transformation program in 2 phases, and in the first phase, they said, shall we include line managers in the pre sort of design before we launch it? And there was like, the problem is, if this gets out, it's going to be quite like disruptive. I think we need to keep it closed. So they kept it closed, and of course it didn't. It still ended up not being great because people didn't feel like they were brought in. So that's kind of one element. So they did learn, right? They went, okay, next phase we're going to do it. But at the end of the first phase, they asked a series of questions about what they didn't do well.
Okay.
And it was scathing, right? Because they knew why they hadn't done it well. So you have to be really careful when you ask for feedback. You've got to be willing to listen to the feedback,
exactly,
and no matter what it is, and you can't ignore it then, because once you've asked for it, but you've set the expectation on people that you're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
So when we came in between the 2 phases, and we were looking back at phase 1, and we were sort of just talking about, it was like, so, you know, what have we done about the feedback? And it was like, well, we haven't done anything.
Nothing.
I'm like, okay, we really need to be clear that of the feedback, we've done this with this is how the program is reshaping. Like, we just need to be super clear, because otherwise people are like, well, what's the point giving feedback? And that's probably another example, right?
And,
we
and
ask for feedback all the time.
Create more distrust, more resistance.
Yeah. It's so easy. This is the thing, right? Like, all of this stuff it's not complicated. It can feel hard because you've got to feel like you're slowing down, but it does give you something that brings people along with you and sets an expectation in people, everybody. Yeah. And that will get you moving faster.
Yeah.
And
you're right. It's not complicated. It's just uncomfortable. And people aren't used to being uncomfortable. Human behavior is going to go flying towards the dopamine, and they don't want they don't want that feeling of stress and negativity.
Yeah, and look, we're all creatures of habit to most extent. But then, I read something earlier this week, which was really interesting. Right, most of us think, curiosity and intrigue is what sometimes motivates us to change, right? But actually, there's a really big motivation to change in boredom. So when people get too much into a rut of something, they're looking for something to. So we're not like I've had CEOs tell me their organizations are resistant to change.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee they are not resistant. What they are is they're overwhelmed with the volume, it being disconnected and not knowing how to go about doing it.
Absolutely.
It just feels tiring.
Yeah.
And that's the bit you want to kind of reduce. You want to reduce the feeling of tiredness so you can work with people's desire to change. People do want to change, and they're very good at doing it. They do it all the time.
Well, we do it in our daily lives.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is why, like, that whole framing of resistance is largely unhelpful, again, because it sort of makes other people out to be a problem. And I think what all they're doing is asking for some coordination, some clarity, some justification to be listened to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So, if there was one key lesson that you think businesses haven't yet learned, what would that be?
I think it might be to do with resistance, maybe listening to it. Yeah, look, I think trying to avoid the word resistance wouldn't be a bad place to start. But whatever you call feedback, resistance, insight, whatever you want to call it, slowing down to listen to it. So, really understanding why people might be giving you the feedback they are. trying to hold your own judgment around whatever is behind it, right? Like I said, if someone gives me feedback, I've got a choice what I do with it. I don't have to judge them for giving it to me. And then being really transparent about what I do next with it. So that is my decision as a leader in an organization. If someone comes to me and says, I don't think we should do this, here's the reasons why, I say, I hear you. I'm still going to do it anyway. Thank you for your feedback. And I take it on that I note that risk, right? It's just a genuine, honest frankness about what we have to kind of contend with. You know, sometimes leaders have more information than others. So they, you know, the risk might seem bigger to someone than it does to someone else. So it's that. I would say,
I love that.
Just lean into sort of that feedback that comes. Don't feel like you have to do anything with it, but be really transparent about what you do plan to do with it, whether that's nothing or yes, we'll incorporate it.
That is a great lesson to take away. Thanks
well, let's
so
hope
much,
people
Ket.
do.
Yeah, let's hope so. I think every organisation would be in a better place if they did.
I don't think for a second they wouldn't be, yeah.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Ket.
Cheers, Kiran.
Thanks. So the CI fix from today's episode is to start getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, to reframe the word resistance to feedback. Actually recognizing that when people are sharing their feedback, whether that's a visual representation of some resistance, like hands, you know, crossed or looking down on the floor, or whether that's someone actually sharing verbal feedback, it's actually a source of information. And with that information, you can start to make informed decisions. Perhaps you'll slow the program down, or perhaps you'll continue as you planned. At least you're doing it without going blind, and you know why you've made that decision. Thanks so much for joining today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.